And many jobs obviously need a level of competence, but that's the foundation, that's the floor we stand on.
The ability to relate a story, ability to explain logic and debate instead of argue at an interview. Communication, around 53% of that is non-verbal, is more visual.
If you've done no research on the company and you've just turned up and you're a bit late, you're talking compliant.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our podcast. We are back again on seeking employment, looking to advise, looking to give a different perspective from the ones of an employer, a very seasoned employer. So this podcast is called Seeking Employment, what employers look for in a candidate. Earlier podcasts on this very subject was there to help school graduates and university graduates in Indonesia, giving them an opportunity to see what's outside of Indonesia, in the Middle East, and in other places. So this one, we are going to open up to all the young graduates from schools and universities and other job seekers who are quite new, just to realize as to what employers are looking for so they could answer to that and not be stressed about it. So I have a very familiar face today who's in the spotlight on learning and development, founding his own company, and running courses on developing people right throughout. So, Nick, welcome again from Red Rock International. Would you like to introduce yourself to our audience, which is slightly different to the ones of our more serious strategic podcast?
Thank you very much, and lovely to see you. Yes, Rifki, so background for me is that I initially worked for a large engineering company, a multinational engineering company. I was responsible for a department called Control and Instrumentation. And then I worked for a systems integration company, like a smaller engineering specialized company. And then in 2000, I co-founded Red Rock International in the UK. And I've been working on that ever since, and we're now working in 5 countries. So lots of experience of directly recruiting people, working with other people on recruiting people, part-time, full-time recruitment. So looking forward to sharing some insights into that.
Thank you very much, Nick. So again, we welcome all graduates from universities and schools from around the world, and also the new youngsters, to the new people who are getting into employment, first-time job seekers, and those who want to move on to a different territory and seek new employment and new challenges. So, Nick, we're going to start off with what gets someone through the interview, what moves people to the top, and how do we advise people to say, or make the hiring manager say yes? What I know that is employers have 4 very big areas to evaluate. First is the outcome, the skills, the signals, and the fit to the organization. That takes us to our first question, our first segment. Employers hire outcomes. How can you solve our problem?
Yeah, it's very good, isn't it? So I think a couple of things on this, Rifki, and Rifki, do add your own thoughts or interrupt me, because you've got lots of good experience in this as well. But the first thing on the problems is I want to know that somebody's going to own the problem. So the problems that we have are real problems. They're difficult. So they're not like simple things. They're tricky problems. So, and I think we're always looking for people that are committed. So when we're employing people or when we work with people, then there's a scale. So one side is compliant. So somebody that does the job, they do everything they need to, but it's a job, and they'll do the minimum, they'll be compliant, and they'll go home. There's nothing wrong with that, obviously, but it's not particularly exciting. I'm looking for people that are committed, that they love this job and they really want to own problems. So in an interview, if you can demonstrate how you've pushed through challenges or a problem, it's demonstrating a level of commitment. So I think that's very helpful. And with that, being able to talk about how you've got a future orientated posture. Because with problems, they're usually due to people. And so it's tempting to blame people. And then you can say, well, I had this problem, but it wasn't really my problem. It was this person's because they didn't do this, which is potentially true. But if you can demonstrate an enthusiastic, future-orientated posture to solving problems, that will be very appealing to your interviewer.
That is actually spot on. One of the things I ask a candidate at an interview is, what are the successes? What are the failures? And I ask them to explain failures, what happened, and what did you do about it? And did you try that again? These are three very different and important areas for me, because first, how they relate the problem. The moment they say, well, it was not caused by me, that says a few things. It makes me a bit uncomfortable, because the first thing you do is you chuck it out, you don't take accountability. But then when the person says, well, something like this happened, I could have done it better. What did you learn from it? These are the things I learned from it. We did it for the first time, didn't work out, but did they do it again? That's my main interest. If somebody has attempted 2 or 3 times trying to make one task successful, it shows me resilience, it shows me persistence, it shows me, look, there is more than one way to get this thing done. I was actually thinking that during the podcast, do we touch on what to answer when an employer asks, tell me something about yourself, which is always the standard question. I would have covered this in my previous podcast. But just to recap to all the people who are watching the podcast for the first time, somebody asks you, tell me something about yourself. I want them to tell me things that are not in the CV. I want them to narrate what will they solve for me, which you very rightly said. That takes us into the evidence of skill, the hard skills and the soft skills that they have to relate to us, that they have to connect with us on. What do we measure in this part, Nick?
Yeah, I think that's very helpful, Rifki. And I think that people like myself and other people that are interviewing people have two areas that we're working on mentally. One is we're ticking boxes. So we simply need to know that the person is competent. So we want to tick that box. We're not delving necessarily deeply into that. So, for example, in my role currently in terms of leadership development, I might want to know that somebody can present, but I'm not developing that deeply. Secondly, I'm wanting to know whether or not they can grow and learn. So that's the key kind of ingredient. We've got to tick the boxes that we're competent and evidence-based. So anybody that says, I'm just amazing at these things, I mean, that's great, but then tell the story about what you've done and how you've used those skills. So that's super important. And many jobs obviously need a level of competence, but that's the foundation, that's the floor we stand on. Then I'm interested in, what have you learned recently? What have you been studying? How have you been using your own time? We employed a marketing guy and he was constantly reading marketing books. He learnt Claude AI on his own. He introduced that into the company. And that's the sort of thing that people are looking for, is that somebody that's going to bring that kind of attitude and development into the company, rather than having to be sent on a course, told to do this, etc. Obviously, that's good. But demonstrate your willingness and enthusiasm to learn, super helpful. And then the key in all of this, the interviewer is going to be thinking behind all of this, will this person fit in my team? Will I be able to work with this person? So again, telling stories of working with other people is very, very useful.
For me, one of the interview experiences I had when I was interviewing a candidate for learning and development specialist was, I keep asking technical questions like evaluation methods, summative and formative, delivery styles, multi-trainer training programs, how do you take over, how do you run smoothly, how do you manage off scripts, impromptus and all of that. So when I ask some of these technical questions and then these practical questions, the candidate who takes time to think and to relate and shares their experience matters to me. And if somebody tells me, no, I haven't done a multi-trainer program before, it was me who delivered a multi-day program, and this is how I managed the momentum. And then if the person does not have that, if the person tells me a very practical or a logical way of handling a multi-trainer program that would make sense, I see potential in that. So this particular candidate, when I asked the questions, he went like this and he went, who does that? I'm like, well, I do that. Yeah, but is it successful? I said, well, the interview is where if you can relate as to how we work, and you would be so much closer to getting the job. One thing in learning and development is that we do things very differently. We do things to make sure there's impact on the audience. The type of mints we keep on the table, there is an impact. The layout of the room has an impact, whether it's classroom or cinema style. So these are things that we keep, that we look for, that technical knowledge and the transferable skills. One thing that I learned in, qualifications and certifications and all of those things, all these education system has a logic behind it. So if a candidate can explain the logic behind the courses which are not related to his profession, like for example, I hired a BSc animal husbandry, and I did hire one. He was a scientist from Kenya. He was able to transfer his from the farm to the table. He was able to transfer that set of skills into developing people for FIFA World Cup. But that tells me that he is able to transfer those skills. That matters to me a lot. The creativity, the people who can see a connection between.
Yeah, it's very good, Rifki. And I think, as being the interviewee, you also are obviously in the interview getting exposure to the culture of the company. And you're also thinking, is this going to be a good fit for me? We're going to come on to fit, aren't we? But so those are good questions to ask. But it's good to think as well that that's a reflection question for after the interview, as opposed to getting into colleague interviewed somebody for our company, and this guy got into a bit of an argument about how to do things. It's a valid to question those things, but probably not in an interview. So you're getting, for the interviewee, you're getting a feel for the company and the culture. And if they do offer you a job, then you're in a good place to think how there's good indications there for me. I think, Rifki, you've got to be competent and demonstrate those well with evidence and succinctly and clearly, work on preparing that and be clear and succinct. And then being able to demonstrate or having an attitude of continual learning is very helpful.
I fully agree with what you're saying. The ability to relate a story, ability to explain logic and debate instead of argue at an interview all comes into our third segment, which are the signals we're looking for. Communication, reliability, learning, and judgment. So how do employers perceive these four areas, Nick?
I think with the getting a job process, there are a lot of things you can't control. You can't immediately just change your last 10 years experience. So, and the basics, you just want to get right. So you can't be late for an interview. So that, really work hard not to be late. Yeah, if you are late and there's a good reason, then you can say sorry, but really work hard not to be late. You can't not turn up appropriately dressed, whatever that is. You need to know the culture of the company, and you can't turn up not knowing about the company. So, if you kind of not done the research on what the company does, what are the current challenges, what's their vision and their values, etc., etc. And these things all signal to the interviewer, this guy cares about the job and they want it. So those are really important because, again, either consciously or unconsciously, we're thinking, is this guy going to be compliant or committed? And if you've done no research on the company and you've just turned up and you're a bit late, you're talking compliant. You've got work then to change the view. Yeah, the character, the reliability, etc. And in your CV, if you're able to demonstrate humble, basic jobs where you had to turn up on time, I always like to see resumes where somebody's worked in McDonald's, because it says to me, this guy is capable of turning up on time day after day. They're reliable and they've got the ethic, the work ethic to do that. But that type of thing for the signals to the employer, this is the right type of character.
And that's something that I look for now that you mentioned McDonald's and the service standards, and day in, day out, it's a very routine job. Like for the service industry and for sales, what I would look for in a candidate is the ability to have that excitement, have that energy, because communication, around 53% of that is non-verbal, is more visual. If somebody walks up to us, the way they walk, the way they dress, like what you said, how they are prepared, that level of confidence lets us know whether we are interested in talking to that person or not. And if the person, who's in the service industry does not have that that confident posture, welcome. That does not make us feel welcome. It's the same
Yeah.
thing when I interview a candidate. When a candidate walks in very comfortable, has a button off, the tie may not be neat, but then realizes, okay, and then sits properly at the interviewer, not like this, this is who I am, this is what I am. That communicates a lot to me. It
Yeah.
communicates the person's values, motivation, that communicates that there is more to him or her than what meets the eye. That preparation, like what you said, is what I want.
Yeah. It's good, Rifki. Yeah. I think reality is we're making our mind up on a decision as soon as a person walks into the room. And then that's either getting strengthened or weakened as the time goes on. But it's like filling a glass of water, that by the time you get to 45 minutes, you've probably made your call, and the last 15 minutes it's going to be very hard to change that call to one way or the other.
Yeah.
But thinking through how you enter the room and what you do, and simply being friendly, warm, shaking people's hands, and saying something like, I appreciate the fact you've given me time for an interview. Thank you. But just something that's
Yes.
setting the scene to say, this is great to be here and I'm grateful for the chance is super helpful foundation.
There was one candidate who converted the interview into a brainstorming session. And for a moment, I realized, no, wait a minute, I'm losing the ability to manage the interview right now. And then I said, look, the conversation is very, very interesting. I need to end this right now. I will definitely get back to you.